kuci.org or check out the latest program guide.
Hello, this is Nima Golbabai on KUCI 88.9 Irvine. So I'm back after 2 weeks of not being here, but in last week's show I actually did record at home and sent it in to my subs, so you got a fresh show. And we did the X-Men trilogy, and we're going to be doing today on my show Amadeus, which is a movie from, let me see the year, I forget, 1984, and it's a great film that I've seen 3 times now, and I'd love to get into that. But before we do, I want to talk about a little thing that happened yesterday, I believe. No, 2 days ago, sorry. So my cousins from Canada are here, and, we were driving around. They were constantly flipping through stations, and the dad, I was going to say my uncle, he's not really my uncle, but we'll call him my uncle, exited the car and went to go get his son, who was kind of throwing a temper tantrum in Fashion Island. And I just saw randomly on the radio, it was on KUCI, and it was sort of like, whoa. It was like we got noticed. We actually are on the radio. I know we are, but when you actually see it, and I told my quote-unquote aunt, she's not really my aunt. I think she's technically my second cousin, but we'll just call her my aunt because she's a bit older. I told my second cousin, like, yeah, I'm on the radio. This is my radio station. And she couldn't believe it. And it was pretty cool and a weird coincidence that that was the station he stopped on, and it was just playing for a bit. It was really cool. I almost didn't believe myself when I was saying it. I was like telling her, like, yeah, I'm on the radio. I was like, am I lying right now? Because it's just weird to bring up out of nowhere. But she was very happy to hear it, I guess. She was kind of impressed. So, yeah. I'm very happy to be here with you today. And we got a great film, Amadeus. So let's pull up the IMDb like I always do. And we'll talk about things like cast and direction first before I get into the synopsis. So, first of all, of the 3 times I've seen this film, the first 2 times were the director's cut, which is 20 minutes longer. And then this time I actually bought the theatrical cut, which is 20 minutes shorter, and I had heard that it's better. Now, do I think it's better or do I not? I honestly don't really think it's that much better. In fact, I might prefer the director's cut a little bit. I do think the director's cut is slightly worse paced because the extra 20 minutes does kind of slow the film down quite a bit, and it can be a bit slow at times, especially during the music scenes, even though they're very good. I think towards the end maybe they're a bit too long. So I think the theatrical cut is definitely like better if you're maybe watching it for the first time, I would say, even though I didn't do it like that. But maybe after that, you want to watch it a second time, do the director's cut. It's only 20 minutes. It does add some good scenes. But I think the theatrical cut is totally fine. It's 2 hours, 40 minutes. The direction of the film is very well done. It's not like Barry Lyndon where it's like drop dead gorgeous type of period piece, but it's a very well directed period piece that does have some very beautiful scenes. The director is Milos Forman, who I believe is from the Czech Republic. Yeah, he was born in Koslov, Czechoslovakia, which is probably in the modern day Czech Republic. Yep. Known as Czechia now, I believe. They changed their name. And he's made some pretty good films, and by pretty good I mean he's made some great films. He made One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is a great film that I watched like around 6 years ago, I would say, and I did really enjoy it, especially because of Jack Nicholson. My friend actually told me that I reminded him of Jack Nicholson, McMurphy, in that film, which I took as a compliment because I think he's a likable character. No, it was definitely a compliment. So yeah, I do like that character of McMurphy a lot, but I also really like Nurse Ratched, who was the female nurse villain. I thought she was amazing. I really liked that character. Other movies he's directed, it's very difficult on IMDb because you can't sort by like the rating, I don't think. Uh, let's see here. I don't know if he's made any other super famous films, but he's definitely done some other ones. I think somewhere in foreign languages too. Okay, so that was the director. We talked about the direction. Now let's talk about the actors. The two main leads I really like in this film. F. Murray Abraham, I think it might be like, it's probably in like a top 25 or for me of performances, I would say, and I'd say Mozart is like up there top 30, 40 performances. I do really enjoy both of these actors and characters. I think Mozart is very funny and likable, and the arc he goes on is really good and sympathetic. And then I think F. Murray Abraham Salieri, where he plays like a super old version and a young version at the same time, was just awesome and masterful, really. And he did win Best Actor for that. Tom Hulce, who played Mozart, was nominated but didn't win. And everyone else is generally quite competent. Um, so yeah, in this film, it's a drama, but it's heavily like comedic. There's just a lot of like light scenes and funny dialogue and kind of like punchline-esque endings to scenes. Very irreverent and all that. And the background of this film is, it's definitely historical fiction. Like, don't be like my mother, who I watched this with, and she always does this for any movie that's like has a historical basis. She always thinks that everything is real and everything really happened the way they say. Like, much of it is inspired by truth in this film. Like, many of the or like the character of Mozart being extremely like talented from a young age, like that's real. His like father, real. Obviously he died at a young age, real. Where he worked, I think a lot of that is real. The fact that he worked with Salieri is real. Much of this is real. The fact that Salieri largely descended into not irrelevance, but much less fame than he enjoyed while he was alive is real. The fact that Mozart wasn't that famous when he was alive, but when he died, he became like the most famous composer ever to live, basically. You know, tied with Beethoven, I would say. And then you got Bach there, that all three of them are kind of like the holy trinity of composers. So much of the historical background and information is definitely true, but the like, you know, the main plot line of like Salieri working Mozart to death is inspired. And it's largely inspired by a conspiracy theory at the time, I believe, that Salieri killed Mozart. Obviously in the film he doesn't directly kill him, but he essentially like works him to death in a way and doesn't like help him out when he should. He's sort of like, we'll get into all this in the synopsis, but Salieri is essentially infatuated by Mozart's genius, and he both resents him for it, that he's so smart, but he's also he's basically just in awe, and like he just wants to be part of his talent, I guess. He wants to like experience it. So he's like a big fan, but he's also like kind of resentful that he's so good. And by the end of the film, he definitely like just wants to sort of like be a part of it more so, I think, than his jealousy was like, I want to kill this guy. We'll get into that. I don't want to spoil it too much soon. Um, what else can I say? A brilliant thing about this film that very few movies get right is it made music part of the telling of the story. Even musicals have a hard time doing this, in my opinion, sometimes. This film, like, really brilliantly uses music as, like, kind of a decompression from the story and, like, gives it time to breathe. Um, and it's also just really good songs in general. I think it also does introduce some people to classical music and how brilliant and revolutionary it was and is today. Um, the themes of this film are pretty great. It's mainly about like legacy and also jealousy. The great thing about the film is you got Mozart, who's kind of like he's a more static character in terms of his like talent and beliefs, and what he actually does is kind of, I take that back. He's not static. He's static in terms of his role in the story. Things mostly just happen to Mozart, but I get he does descend into like drinking and stuff. In that way, he's not static. But Salieri is the more complex character where he's sort of like starts out resenting Mozart a lot, even to the point of wanting to kill him. Yet at the end of the film, it's very clear that he just really wants to experience his genius and like be a part of his world. Um, and like write that last piece with him, which is the fantastic ending scenes of the movie. And of course, the film begins with a suicide attempt of a very old Salieri who believes he killed Mozart. So obviously he really regrets what he did, but he didn't literally kill Mozart. He just feels like he worked him to death or didn't help him or schemed and hated him. So it is a really good character and a good villain, but definitely like a villain that is like does go on like a partial redemption arc by the end, because he's not exactly a saint, but he's not a guy that's going to kill someone over hating that he's better at music than him. He's more just have those feelings, but he doesn't act on them. And obviously, by the end, like I said, he's just enamored by Mozart's talent and like confesses to him that like he saw every one of his operas, even though many people in like Vienna and the court, which they're part of, the imperial court of Austria, resented. Okay, so this has been about 15 minutes of background, but that's good because background is so much more interesting than the synopsis. Really, it is. But you need the synopsis because you have to fill the hour. I can't just talk forever about background. Not alone. With someone else, you can really like hit back and forth and do new ideas. But when you're on your own, you need some structure. All right, let's see the Oscars. It won 8 Oscars. That's huge. I was not aware it won that many. So what did it win? It's a very successful film. Best Picture, wow, great. Best Actor in a Leading Role, F. Murray Abraham, great. Nominee, it didn't win this one, but nominee Best Actor for Tom Hulce as Mozart. Best Director, Milos Forman. Best Writing, Peter Schaefer. Best Cinematography, Miroslav. Oh, he didn't win. Never mind. Best Art Direction, Set Decoration, Patricia von Brandon Steen and Carol Cerny. A lot of Europeans here. Best costume design. Costume design was very good, yeah. My favorite one was the disguise of Salieri with the Venetian mask with the cloak. I liked that a lot. It was very cool. Best sound. Alright. Best makeup. Okay. Let's get into the synopsis. Okay. 1 second here. Okay, there we go. So, like I said, the film begins with a elderly Salieri, basically like partially slitting his throat, but being taken to like a hospital, not really a hospital, but like a medical place to heal, and he actually survives the attempt. And we get basically some flashbacks. And the synopsis doesn't mention it, but we get it through a conversation which takes place throughout the film gradually between, a priest who's like talking to Salieri, like saying like, my child, like, confess your sins, and like, we have time for all children of God. He's basically like comforting him because he, tried to kill himself. And so Salieri explains like why he killed himself. He said, tried to kill himself. He said it's because he killed Mozart. And then we get to see his life through dialogue and narration and flashbacks. So we get a flashback to the 18th century, at the time where Salieri has not met Mozart in person, but has heard of him and his music. Salieri is a kid who loves music and has grown up hearing about the genius of Amadeus Mozart. Mozart's father adores him and takes him all over Europe to perform in front of kings and popes. Salieri's dad, in contrast, does not encourage him at all, but one fine day, Salieri chokes on his food and dies, marking the true beginning of Salieri's music composition career. Okay, the synopsis did not include a very important point. Salieri prayed in church for God to make him a great composer, and then like shortly after, his father dies. So Salieri credits God with killing his father. Not that he prayed for his father to die, but that started his musical career. So this starts Salieri's kind of slightly dark relationship with God, but also it starts his ambition of wanting to be the greatest composer that would like make music worthy of God. Like he kind of has like a religious destiny sort of ambition with making music. He wants to be close to God and exalt God with his music, which was pretty common in the Renaissance period, where art would be made of like biblical scenes, think of the Sistine Chapel and all that. So it would be like things that would really exalt God. But also this was common like during medieval times. I think the techniques weren't as good. Of course, in the Renaissance, I think we're a bit past the Renaissance, but whatever, post-Renaissance. They also like did like a lot of pagan gods and did stuff like that, but I think in the back of the mind was a lot of like beauty to exalt God, and like the Catholic Church would fund a lot of art projects and things like that. So that's kind of his mindset. And soon Salieri is appointed to court composer and has immense powers in terms of determining the futures of musicians in Vienna. He adores Mozart's compositions and is thrilled at the chance to meet Mozart. So he's like at this like palace, and Mozart's supposedly playing at this thing, and he can't find Mozart, and he basically accidentally finds Mozart. He's hiding behind a table, and Mozart doesn't see him, but Mozart is like very crude and he's inappropriate, and it basically shatters Salieri's expectations that someone so talented could be so sort of like, I don't want to say ungodly and like he's immoral. He's just like not modest, I guess. He's like loud and he tells crude jokes and he's like a fool basically. So yeah, so he hears all this, like Mozart being profane, and then he's also not in the room where he's supposed to be composing music, and then they start playing without him, and Mozart runs over and starts composing, and he's late, and it's all like pretty bad. And oh wow, it really skips a lot of stuff in this synopsis, but anyway, Mozart sort of falls out with the cardinal. I think it's Cardinal Bishop of Salzburg, and then he goes to Vienna. But before this, like, Salieri has a realization that as a devout Catholic, he cannot believe that God would choose Mozart over him to being like the best composer in the world. And Salieri kind of feels betrayed. Salieri, it really skips a lot. Okay, so in Vienna, there's a scene where Salieri composes a piece for the emperor, and Mozart just walks in, and just off hearing it alone, he can replay it just from his ear. So it's another very enjoyable scene that's very cool, has some great funny bits in it, just great. And it kind of shows like Mozart as being very talented, but also like quite arrogant, even though he can totally back it up. So it's not really arrogance, but he's very like confident of himself, and it's kind of abrasive, and he kind of humiliates Salieri unintentionally by like saying his song needs some work in front of the emperor. And at this point, Salieri kind of renounces God and does everything in his power to destroy Mozart as a way of getting back at God. The king, this is incorrect, he wasn't the king of Austria, he was the emperor of Austria, commissions Mozart to perform an opera, and basically Mozart surpasses everyone's expectations with a brilliant piece, but also the emperor like kind of criticized it a bit, and Mozart was also very incredulous and a little bit arrogant. Like, it was a little bit of a tiny criticism. It was inaccurate, but Mozart's kind of just like doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut. But Salieri is this synopsis is totally incorrect. Okay, so Salieri is angry as Mozart casts Salieri's girlfriend, Katrina, in the opera without his permission. It's not his girlfriend. Salieri was celibate. He took a vow of celibacy to, like, please God. It wasn't his girlfriend. He just had, like, a bit of lust for her. Like, he had a desire for her, but he says in the movie that he never touched her. So she was not his girlfriend. Just completely incorrect. And after the performance, Katrina comes to know that Mozart is engaged to Constanze, and she's angry. So Salieri realizes that Mozart and Katrina have basically had romantic relations with each other, and this makes Salieri even more angry and jealous, because even though they're not girlfriend, like, he didn't want her to go with anyone else. So soon after, Mozart marries Constanze. I don't think it's Constanze. I'm so stupid. It's Constance. It's just with a Z-E. I'm so dumb. It's not Constanze.
Constance. So he marries Constance without his father's permission to hold off the wedding. I really like the actor that plays his father. Who's that, by the way? I want to see. Let me check. Roy Detrice. Let's see what else this fellow is in. Oh, he was the pyromancer from Game of Thrones. A very minor character, but if you're a big fan, you'll know who it is. He briefly appeared in Season 2 when Tyrion is looking to blow up the ships on the Blackwater. And yeah, the pyromancer basically is the order that creates wildfire, which is a powerful flammable substance that burns very hot and can be used as bombs, and also can, be thrown on water and it still burns. Bit of a sidetrack there. He's a very good actor, that guy. So throughout much of the rest of the movie, Salieri masquerades as Mozart's ally to his face while doing his utmost to destroy his reputation and any success his compositions may have. The king wishes to appoint Mozart as musical trainer for his daughter, but Salieri convinces the king to compose a committee for the selection, for which all composers must submit their work. Mozart refuses out of pride and is denied the job. There's some scenes in the extended edition that makes it even more villainous. Like, Salieri spreads rumors that Mozart has, he basically, I don't know how to say this on air to be polite, but he harasses the young girls that he teaches, which is a lie, but Salieri does it so the emperor won't want to hire him. So, and he loses work off this, and his money dries up. So it is pretty villainous, and Salieri is a pretty bad person, because in his actual face to face with Mozart, he seems very friendly and helpful, and they seem to be friends, and he always promises to help Mozart, but he's constantly spreading rumors and making sure his plays aren't played enough. Of course, these are fictional things. I don't want you to think that this movie is a documentary, but in the movie, Salieri is an enemy of Mozart. Like I said, there's a bit of a redemption arc as we go on, but yeah. On more than one occasion, it is only the direct intervention of the emperor himself that allows Mozart to continue. Interventions with Salieri opposes, but is all too happy to take credit for when Mozart assumes it is he who has intervened. So this is cutting out a lot of stuff. Essentially, Mozart is doing a play, but the emperor has decreed some regulation that dancing and music can't go together, or whatever. And the emperor sees it, and he's like, this is rubbish, you're allowed to do it. And Mozart assumes Salieri is the reason, because he had asked him prior, but in truth, Salieri didn't do anything. It was just the emperor walked in the play and realized it was terrible. So Salieri also humiliates Mozart's wife when she comes to Salieri for aid. Constance shows Mozart's work to Salieri to get him to consider Mozart for the job in the court. I love this scene, and there's a very famous meme of it. You've most likely seen it, even if you don't know, where Salieri is looking at pages of music and he drops all the papers. It's a very cool scene and funny meme. Basically, his wife, Constance, brings the work that Mozart's too proud, because Mozart doesn't think he has to apply to the job because he's already qualified by all the stuff he's done. But his wife does it because they need the money, and essentially Salieri looks at it and is completely mesmerized and is like, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And we hear like the narration of him as an old man talking to the priest and about what he saw and how brilliant it was. And he tells his wife, like, they're fantastic, they're just sublime. But he does something that is like really villainous. And I gotta figure out how to say this. I'm always paranoid I say something that's not allowed. But he essentially asks Mozart's wife for like a quid pro quo, like he asks her to essentially, let's say, debase herself for her husband's promotion, and she agrees. But then he just walks out of the room, basically like humiliating her and basically saying like, you're a chump, you're willing to debase yourself for your husband's work, because like I said, he's celibate. Also, that was in the extended edition. That was not in the actual movie theatrical. So that's why I'm saying the director's cut actually does include a lot of good stuff that was cut. Like, that scene was really good, and it is like a really awful thing he does. It's so messed up and mean, honestly. So yeah, when she arrives to do this thing that Salieri said, Salieri summons his servants and asks them to show her out, and then smears Mozart's character with the emperor in the court. Hence, nobody would give work to Mozart as a music director or to their wards. And this is what I was talking about, where he basically said lies that Mozart did some unsavory things with his young female pupils. Then he does something else that's pretty bad. He hires a maid to work as a spy in Mozart's house. He does so anonymously as a gift. He instructs the maid to let him in when Mozart and his wife are out in the town, so that he can look at the super secret composition that Mozart has been working on, one that he claims will revolutionize music in all of Europe. Salieri looks and realizes Mozart is composing an opera on the French play Figaro, which has been banned by the king, by the emperor, not the king. And essentially it's been banned because I think in France it stirred up like class tensions, and obviously like that led to revolution. Not just the play, but I think the play was kind of like a working class hero or something. And so Mozart is summoned to court in the middle of fierce opposition. He's able to convince the emperor that the play is not political, and he's changed parts of it to be like elevated to the level of art. He gets the approval from the emperor. Then Salieri tries to sabotage the opera by imposing a fictitious royal order not to have ballet in the opera. Oh, we talked about that, which would cause Mozart to junk the whole thing. But the emperor surprises everyone by attending the rehearsal and approves the whole thing. Salieri uses his influence to ensure that the opera is performed only 9 times. It is only a moderate success, but he confesses, this is all through like narration of the old man, Salieri, to the priest, that like he was in love with it. And even though he restricted its show times secretly, he went to every single one. So he's obviously like a huge admirer of Mozart, but he's also like doesn't want Mozart to become successful, which is sad. But like I said, towards the end of the film, I think it's clear that he's sort of dropped that. But for now, he's still angry. Salieri, the next opera written upon Mozart's father's death is an absolute masterpiece. So this is the famous Requiem from Mozart, and which is a death mass, and Lacrimosa, which is a part of it, which is the final song that's played in this movie. The opera written upon Mozart's father's death, is an absolute masterpiece in Salieri's own admittance. But he again limits... Oh no, this is not Requiem, sorry. This is Don Giovanni. He wrote after his father's died. One of my favorite songs ever, actually. And yeah, it's beautifully done in this movie. And you get to see how Mozart was inspired by his father's death. And he made basically this specter dressed in black. With a mask as his father. And he's basically in love with it again, but he limits it to only 5 shows. Mozart falls more and more into financial trouble, but he keeps working on his operas constantly, surprising Salieri. In the poverty of his life, Constance decides to leave Mozart and go to her mother. Interacting with her mother gives Mozart the inspiration for his next masterpiece. This is one of my favorite scenes where Mozart's mother-in-law is screaming at him, and then there's a beautiful transition of her screaming voice into the opera Queen of the Night, which is like a woman screeching in a very beautiful way, but it's a beautiful transition. And he collapses during the performance, and Salieri, of course, was watching the performance because he's a massive admirer of Mozart secretly. And he collapses. Salieri takes him. So it says like some analysis here in the synopsis. It says a major theme of Amadeus is Mozart's repeated attempts to win over the aristocratic elite with increasingly brilliant compositions, which are always frustrated either by Salieri or by the aristocracy's own inability to appreciate Mozart's genius. Yeah, this is one of my favorite parts of like the themes was, or not, maybe not the themes, but like the background, I guess background theme of the movie is like Mozart is just like kind of rejected by the elite class, and it's sort of like an unjust situation, which is clear because after he died, like people appreciated what he did way more than what the aristocrats were into at the time. And that's why the final scenes are more poignant, because Salieri admits to Mozart face to face that he's in love with his music. So let's get to that. Salieri and Mozart in probably the best scene in the movie. This is an incredible sequence where a very not drunk, but exhausted and increasingly look like he's kind of dying, Mozart is sitting in a bed as Salieri helps him write this last opera for a funeral that Salieri has anonymously commissioned. He basically came to his house in that mask that he made for Don Giovanni, which was inspired by his father, and said, like, here's some gold coins, write me a funeral mass. And so it's not finished, so Salieri helps Mozart finish it. And they do it, and it's like an incredible scene of genius, and Salieri sort of finally gets a chance to be part of this guy's music that he's admired this whole time secretly, and there's some pretty nice scenes between the two, and in my opinion, it constitutes a loose redemption arc. Like I said, he's not a saint. He's not totally redeemed, but in this scene, in my opinion, it's clear that Salieri has dropped most of his jealousy, and he's certainly dropped his desire to hold Mozart back. And he's also dropped his most angry desire, which is he wanted to kill Mozart as a way of getting back at God. So it's clear that's not going to happen. And so Mozart is like, I thought you didn't care for my music. And Salieri sort of very softly says, like in sort of a voice that was a bit different than the rest of his performance, which was more like kind of strong. He says kind of like in a voice of a friend, I guess. He's like, "You are the best composer known to me," and like he's just admits like you're perfect, and he helps him do the opera, and they fall asleep, and Mozart's wife comes back with their kid, and he gets one last moment with them, and then he dies. And the film ends with Lacrimosa, what they wrote together, in the Requiem, I think it's called. Yeah, and you see Mozart was buried. I don't know if this is true, but it showed him being buried in like a mass grave. So it's sort of, and Salieri is kind of watching very bleakly during this funeral scene. Like he's not excited. He got what he wanted. Mozart died, but turns out it wasn't really what he wanted. And yeah, so it's a pretty sad and emotional scene, both because the character was very likable, because it's tragic, because he was buried in a mass grave, because there's a beautiful scene of friendship between Salieri and a redemption arc for Salieri before he dies, and the fact that his wife and kids just got home from like kind of a marital spat. And then we go back to like the present day with the old Salieri talking to the priest. And essentially he basically like in a sort of self-loathing way sort of says like kind of accepts that he won't be remembered and calls himself a mediocrity. And it's a very iconic scene where he's being pushed through a wheelchair through a sanatorium, and there's like people that are like really mentally ill, like hitting themselves and in cages and stuff, and he's just a composer, and he's like, of all the mediocrities of the world, I absolve you. And like he's kind of pretending he's a priest, sort of mocking the priest that was talking to him. And it's a very funny end to the movie, showing a little bit of humility from Salieri, even though he definitely wasn't a mediocrity. He was a great composer, but in terms of his fame and the memory he has in like the public's mind compared to Mozart, yeah, he was not really the most famous. Of course, if you play classical music, you'll know Salieri. And hey, think about it this way. Because of this movie, whether it's true or not, whether it paints him as a villain or not, he became famous, super famous in the eyes of the general public. Everyone that watches this film knows Salieri, whether they know he's a good guy or not. Sorry, I was just reading something over here on Wikipedia. I'll talk about it in a second. Whether you think he's a good guy or not, he became famous through this movie. And it reminds me of a quote from a controversial person, but we'll talk about him. Roger Stone. He said something like, "It's better to be." Let me get the exact quote. Yeah, he said like, "It's better to be infamous than never to be famous at all," and it's a quote from Roger Stone, and it's sort of, I think it is true. I mean, in many ways, for at least, I think especially after you die, in terms of being remembered, like a lot of the people from history we don't even consider people anymore. They're sort of just memories. And I guess maybe this film made Salieri a little infamous, but it certainly made him famous, which he was famous, but he wasn't super famous. He's not so famous that, people like a rapper 300 years later would put your name in one of their songs, right? Like Mozart, sometimes a rapper wants to talk about Mozart or Beethoven or J.S. Bach. Like, I don't know if Salieri's quite that famous, or that the fact that kids know Mozart yet they don't know one of his songs. It's kind of like Darth Vader, I Am Your Father. Everybody knows that. Yet many people haven't seen Star Wars, yet everybody knows about Darth Vader. It's like certain people become so famous where they just become icons, where they can't be erased by a lack of knowledge about what they actually were or who they were, which is very fascinating. It happens to a lot of people throughout history. Well, not a lot, but I mean, there's a fair few people that people really don't know anything about, but they know them perfectly in a way. They know about them, even if they don't know the details. Like I was saying with Darth Vader. Like, everyone knows he's a guy in a black cape, he wears black, he has a black mask, he has a red lightsaber, he says, I'm your father. It's like from a very young age. Same with Mozart and music. So we got like 8 minutes left. Oh yeah, I was reading on the Wikipedia that, see, this is the real Salieri, not the fictionalized one. Like, he actually trained, he was a pupil for Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart Jr., which, if you don't know, Mozart actually had, I think, one or maybe two kids that became composers, like famous composers. They obviously never reached their father's skill, because usually that's rare with someone that famous. But yeah, like this guy, his name is Franz Xaver Wolfgang Mozart. I think I've actually like seen one of his songs one time. But yeah, Amadeus is a great movie. I saw it for the first time in, I believe, 2020, maybe. No, it was 2020, not early 2021. It was a very good experience, but I thought it was like a 9 out of 10, like 9.0. But the second time I watched it, I was like, no, this is like a 9.5. So a big increase. And when I watched it again, I'd say it's either 9.5 or 9.6. It's a incredible film. And if you love classical music, you kind of have to watch it. But even if you don't, it's not necessary. It's just a really good story. I kind of always tell people, like, a great film is not going to be something that only appeals to one type of person that's like obsessed with some certain genre or topic. Like, you don't need to be a fan of boxing to watch Rocky. Rocky, on its surface, is a boxing movie, but it's not about the boxing, and you don't need to like boxing. It's about a person overcoming great odds to accomplish something great. So, likewise, this film isn't really about classical music. Sure, there's classical music in it, but it's like I said, it's a story about like legacy and jealousy and talent and genius, stuff like that. And it's paired with great direction, great acting. It all works very well. Got 5 minutes, so I think I talked about everything I could say for now about Amadeus, but maybe I want to talk a little bit more about what constitutes a great movie and appealing to lots of different people.
Um, I think so. I would say that certain movies, let's talk about like different directors. Kubrick movies, I think definitely you have to have a certain type of character you like. I think you have to be more okay with the idea of the main character not being like a super moralistic character, I think, for that. But on the other hand, in terms of like genre, they're not that rigid, and a lot of different people can, like, Clockwork Orange, people like quote it as like a futuristic movie, but that's kind of like not right, actually. Doesn't really accurately describe the movie. Clockwork Orange, you could love that movie for the fact that it discusses like free will. You could love it, not discusses, but it's about like what makes a human being good, and it's very complex themes about free will and choosing good over evil. You could love it for that reason. You could love it because it's fun. You could love it because the styling is so unique. You could love it because the character is very iconic. You could love it because of the direction. Meanwhile, you could love Space Odyssey because it looks beautiful, or you could love it because of how it makes you feel at the end, where you don't know exactly what is meant by the film. You have to discover it yourself. Shining, you could love it because it's scary or creepy, or you could love it because it's like about a guy going crazy in a house with his wife. So yeah, there's so many different things that people can love about films, but I guess films that are kind of more rigid and don't have much on other than the surface are the ones that aren't really as interesting. Like, let me try to think of movies that are. I always think of good movies. It's hard for me to think of bad movies because they kind of fade from your brain. Um, okay, I guess like we talked about X-Men: The Last Stand. That's an example of a movie that it's not really about much, so you really just have to like superhero movies and superhero action movies to like it, because the first two movies actually have a lot that someone that isn't interested in superhero movies could like. Like, it's got like a great sort of father-daughter relationship in Rogue and Wolverine, and then it's got like discussions about discrimination and sort of like scapegoating and marginalization of people that are different. It's got loads of things that you could latch onto, but with The Last Stand, it's so basic and inch deep, and there's not much discussion of anything, that it's so bland. That, like, if I showed X-Men 1 to someone that hates superhero movies and showed X-Men 3 to someone that hates super movies, I bet they could like X-Men 1. Because the genre isn't not the most important thing. It is not. That is not true. It's the execution, it's the characters, it's the story, and the direction. Okay. Well, that was a little bit of a rant put on at the end of this show, but I liked it. It was fun. And yeah, I'm going to sign off now, and I'll play some music for you guys. But this has been Nima Goldwyn on KUCI 88.9 Irvine. I'll see you next time.
Before it turned to stone, I saw the silver lining.